pretty well so far. I have just been too busy to think about it hurting. But each time I've gotten up to go pee, it's hurt a lot. I just choked down my lunch, and I'm going to take a pill just as we start back again. And I think I'm going to make it. We'll see how we do when it's time to walk back to the car. But I'm sitting the whole time, and I grabbed a chair, and I'm sitting at the table facing everybody, and it's working out well, and it's on the camera. And I haven't gotten up to do the board or anything, but we're getting through stuff pretty well. I had to zip through stuff to try to finish what I wanted to before the lunch break, and we still didn't make it until 12:40. Well, that's until 12:50. 12:50, which is 20 minutes later than I wanted to. So we're starting back at 1:20, and I'm still going to shoot for 3 o'clock. If I can get it done, that'd be great. So that'll be, what, an hour and 20, that's a little over an hour and a half. I ought to be able to get through that next chapter in an hour and a half. It's condominiums and co-ops and stuff like that. But it took a long time getting through entities today, corporations, corporations, and partnerships and all that stuff. I had a lot of good questions on tenants by the entirety and judgment, asset, liability stuff, and so I think it's pretty good. It's just not, as I said to you, I'm sitting at the desk, and I'm probably still being filmed. It's just not, but everybody else is on the lunch. It's just not the same interaction because it has many people, I just did. Yeah, I imagine. I think Fred cuts out the lunch breaks and stuff like that when he posts these things. I think we'll see. Hopefully. Wait, Pam changed it this morning too, even though I did. Did you say? No, I mean, so it's been in there very short times in each case, I guess. I changed it, I guess, about 9, right? Oh, earlier. Okay. And brought you some ginger ale, you said? Okay. And Linda did Linda go to the thing this morning? Did she have any comment about that? They meaning Pam too? Oh, good. Okay. Did John go with Linda? I figure that's pretty much what it was. A bunch of speeches about aren't you people fortunate that we built you this park? Oh, okay. And that they do at other parks the same little pony shop. Okay. Did Bob or Fred either one get to speak? Oh, okay, well, I'm sorry. I'm disappointed in it. I wish he had. And of course, she's who made it happen. No question about it. Well, great. Well, that's good. Well, honey, okay. Well, I'm glad they went, and I'm glad so you're feeling pretty good. Okie doke. Well, Lee wrote to me at some point. Said, I haven't wanted to bother you guys. How are you doing? And so I wrote her back. I said, I'm teaching today, and I think Kathleen is doing okay when I left her anyway. So I didn't know whether she was going to get back to you or what. Okay, all right. Well, I couldn't remember whether that was a joint text or just to me, Okay. Well, okay, honey. Well, all right. Well, I'm glad you're doing okay. I hope you get to rest some more. And I would certainly hope to be there by 4 o'clock, if not sooner. But it is a load. Thanks, honey. I appreciate it. You have a great afternoon. I'll see you soon. Love you too. Bye-bye.
this a good start to the quiz? I mean, I'm going to be getting in the 90s.
I'm sorry, what?
No, I was just wondering about the quiz. Will we be getting another quiz today?
Will I do what?
Will we be getting another quiz today?
No, will not be another quiz today.
Okay.
That was just for practice.
Okay.
All right?
Okay.
Okay.
There's not much of a difference between the S Corp and the limited liability, except for the unlimited members.
I'm sorry?
The S Corp and the limited liability, the
Limited
LLC.
liability company,
The LLC, yeah.
LLC.
Yes.
What is the difference? Well, they're very different structures. There are no stockholders in an LLC. They're only members, no stockholders.
Okay.
And they don't have a board of directors. Like, they're really, frankly, they're very different.
Oh, so they don't have a board of directors on
Board of
LLC?
directors don't have officers. They just have a managing member, like I told you. It's really a very different structure. It's a structure more like a partnership. LLC is really more like a partnership.
Okay.
It's very much like a limited partnership, with one managing person and the rest are limiteds. Frankly, they're not very similar. An S corp is simply a corporation that's filed an election with the IRS to be treated like to be taxed like a partnership. But other than that, it's just like any other corporation. With a corporation with a board of directors and stockholders and officers and an S corp. An S corp is really it's a corp.
I mean, with the board of directors, they're the ones who basically make the major decisions.
Depends on how it depends on how a corporation is set up. The board may be very active or they may not be active at all, but they elect the board elects officers. And the board appoints a president and a vice president, and for the most part, they usually run the corporation. The board of directors, the board usually meets once a month and makes big policy decisions, but the day-to-day decisions are made by president and vice presidents.
Okay, and they're the ones who elect the vice president and the president?
The board, exactly.
The board, yeah.
The board, yes. The board appoints them.
Okay.
Yeah, they do. And sometimes they're directors and sometimes they're not.
So even if you, as an individual, start a S corp, and you're the president initially, the board can remove you after a while.
There are a lot of factors. You may or may not have an employment contract. Some presidents have an employment contract. But sure, you can be removed. Any corporate officer can be removed by the board if there's a problem.
Well, like S corps, you can still be private as an S corp instead of going public. Having shares.
Oh, they are always private. They could never go public. You can only have 75 shareholders in an S corp, so it's never going to be public. It's just going to be small.
Yeah.
It could be a private offering, a small securities offering, but it's not going to be like on the New York Stock Exchange or anything like that. No, definitely not, because there can only be 75 shareholders.
A corporation will be.
Could be if it's big.
Yeah.
If it's big, sure. Some corporations are one person. They're not all like General Motors. And some S corps are big and some are little.
Yeah.
It's hard to draw any one simple statement and apply it to everybody. Apply it to every corporation, for example. All corporations are all very different from each other. Corporations that are not S corps are called C corps. And a lot of C corps are very different from each other, and a lot of S corps are very different from each other.
Can you start one and switch to the next? For instance,
between an S and a C, yes.
Okay, suppose you start as a corporation and want to switch to an LLC. Can you do that?
That's difficult. It can be done, but it's very difficult.
Okay.
It has tax problems. It creates tax issues if you do that.
Okay.
But corporations switch back and forth
From S and
between being
C.
C corps and S corps.
Okay.
They go back and forth in different years.
I mean, what's the difference? Because it's not stated here. What's the difference between the C and the S?
Taxes.
Okay.
Now, it is stated there. It says they're taxed different, see the taxation? It says that the corporation is double taxed,
Ah,
and an
okay.
S corp is not. It's taxed like a partnership.
Oh,
And they're unlimited shareholders in a C corp, and it can only be 75 shareholders in an S corp.
oh, I didn't know the corporation was a C corp, the same thing.
It's just, it is exact, it's a corporation that's just taxed differently, that's all it is.
Oh, okay.
Which one's a REIT? Would that be an LLC?
I'm sorry, say again?
A REIT, REIT?
We're gonna talk about them at the end of the next chapter. A REIT is a weirdo. It's a special tax animal that Congress created, and they were big back in the 70s.
Oh, so it's none of these.
It's nothing you're gonna form, you're not gonna have one. No, I mean, they're huge, like American Century and things like that, you know.
Well, I see that, I mean, all the businesses are starting to form their REITs to sell off their land. And like Sears is doing it, I saw a couple of the companies.
Is that the way it's the way they're doing it? I didn't know that. I
They're
didn't
starting
know
to,
that's the way they were
I mean,
structured.
like, it's, I mean,
So
every day.
they're taking in investors, is that the idea, to sell them off to a group of
Yeah,
investors? in
and
a
it's
REIT?
not just Sears, I'm telling you, that it's like, I've been seeing like 5 or 6, like, every week.
Wow,
that-
okay.
that
I don't
is-
keep up.
Sears is doing like sale leasebacks.
That's right, they're all doing the
selling to a REIT in a sale leaseback structure.
Well, they create the
Oh,
REIT.
okay.
They
So
create the
they
REIT.
still get to use the
Sell
location?
the
Yes.
REIT.
Okay.
So they create the REIT, sell the REIT, and then lease it back.
Interesting.
So, but the point is they get investors involved in the REIT.
Yeah.
For the land.
And that way
They
they
get
get
all
their
the
money
money
back on
back
the land.
for-
They get their
for
money on the land, but
operation.
they get to keep
Yep.
using it.
Right.
That's right.
Well,
And-
it's really Sears is just delaying the inevitable, I think.
No, but a
They're
lot of
trying
companies
to
are doing it.
create, well,
A lot of
Sears in
profitable
particular,
companies are doing it.
They're low on cash, so they're doing the sale leaseback kind of thing. It increases their cash, but their business model is still their business model. That's not changing. I don't know. I think they're delaying the inevitable.
No, but there's a bunch of them. I heard like several.
I didn't know that
other
was going
REITs
on. I hadn't kept up with that
that
stuff.
are happening, and it's crazy. Like I've probably seen, there are all these REITs spin off. It's a cash flow injection though, really. If you think about it. Without having to like, it's another source of, because they already
Yeah,
have stock.
REITs are very heavily regulated by IRS. Very tight rules and,
What they do.
I'm not that familiar with them because they are so specialized.
Right.
But I didn't realize that they were coming back again.
You know,
Because they were really in vogue in the 70s and 80s, and then they quit. People quit.
Already offered her. She got me.
At Einstein,
And I'm not sure what-
way there.
They were the big mortgage lenders back in
Right.
the 70s, the big condo lenders, and somebody to kind of minute. They were like REITs.
Well, they're only good when real estate is booming because. Right, but once, when you have a bubble crash, everybody's going to
Well, we're gonna talk about them at the end of the next chapter, because they bring them in the discussion of securities. And there's securities at the end of the condo chapter, which we're not gonna get into heavily, because securities is weird, but that's where they bring in the REIT discussion.
Okay, Garden Restaurants, which owns Olive Garden, Red Lobster, one other just started
Yeah,
their
there's a
own.
third one.
They sold Red Lobster. Remember?
I don't know, they used to, I know they used to.
Olive Garden was their other,
Right.
yeah.
It's crazy.
What time does this class get out again?
I'm sorry?
What time do we get out of this class again?
3 o'clock. What time do we quit? 3. That's the target. We'll try.
I probably do, but.
No, you have to go to the library and register your computer.
I think give it a thumbs up.
So you have better access. If you don't, then it's like on and off stuff.
You're slow stuff.
Okay, folks, let's go back at it.
More?
You good?
Yeah.
Let's just, we obviously had to rush to try to get the lunch break to finish on entities. I want to be sure that everybody understands that these decisions are largely made by accountants and tax people. And you're not just gonna pick one off the list here and go out and form one. You need professional help. The most important thing to do anytime you get a group of investors together, if you don't already have one, is get a good tax expert, whether it's your CPA, whether it's a tax lawyer. But let him give you advice, he or she give you advice on how to structure your entity and which ones are better for you. In virtually anything you're gonna do today, you're gonna get limited liability. You have to be careful in a limited partnership that you don't screw up and have the limited start driving it. And if they do, then they become generals and they become liable. But if you're careful in any of these entities, you're going to accomplish your liability shelter. And of course, I want to make two comments on the liability shelter. The liability shelter from personal injury of people getting hurt on your property, well, that's something you buy insurance for anyway. So you're going to have liability insurance coverage for people getting hurt, so that's not as huge a question as it might be, as long as you buy the coverage, and you'd be crazy not to. But secondly, realize when we talked about liability shelter from debt, when you're a small beginning developer entity, or even when you're a bigger entity, banks on debt are going to require the heavy hitters to personally guarantee debt anyway. You're going to find that your major stockholders, your principals, are signing notes and mortgages with guarantees personally, and so they're not getting any liability shelter. If they sign a $10 million mortgage, they have individually said, if the entity doesn't pay it back, I'm going to pay it back. So there's the wonderful concept of there's liability shelter there for investors from debt. Yeah, if you don't go out and personally guarantee the debts. And of course, it's easy to sit back and say, well, I'm not going to guarantee the debts, and that's fine, and then maybe you're not going to get along, which means you're not going to do a deal. So it's very possible that the liability shelter that you're trying to arrange for yourself is not going to be possible anyway because of banks' requirements of personal guarantees. Anybody want to ask any more questions on these type entities before we move? Because now we're going to talk about condominiums and co-ops and stuff like that. Okay. Alrighty. And the chapter is condominiums and co-ops and stuff like that. Chapter 6. The definition here of a condominium in the text is excellent. It's one of the best I've ever seen to put into 3 lines what a condominium really is. Because a condominium is extraordinarily complicated. As we talked about, heavily legislated, not only from statutory regulation, but also from administrative regulation of rules and regs of departments. But the definition here of a condo is good. It says it is fee simple ownership of one unit in a multiple unit structure, combined with ownership of an undivided interest in the land and all other parts of the structure, held as tenants in common with the owners of all of the other individual units. Let's go through that and talk about that for just a second. You have a lot of these concepts we've touched on already. You're going to have fee simple ownership of an apartment, basically. We can talk about commercial condos, and yeah, you can do commercial condos, but there's still not that many of them around. Mostly we're talking about residential. So we're saying there's individual fee simple ownership of an apartment, and then everything else in a condominium project, everything else, meaning all of the land that the building is sitting on, and everything else in a building that is not part of a unit, stairs, halls, laundry rooms, rec rooms, parking garages, everything else is owned by all of the unit owners as tenants in common. like we've talked about, all have undivided interests together in all of those common elements, which are all the parts of the property that are not the units. A lot of people think that in a condominium, the land is owned by the condo association, and it's not. It's owned by all of the unit owners as tenants in common. And to relate back to some of the things we talked about before, but because tenants in common can file partition actions, there are specific provisions in our Florida statutes and in every condominium document that say, even though all of you unit owners are tenants in common of the common elements, you may not partition. So, let's talk about some of the individual terms that are used in this area. But before doing so, and I get up and draw something on the board if I felt like it, I'm sorry that I don't. But I mean, if we just drew a picture of a piece of land and an apartment building on there with a bunch of units in the building, that's what the site plan of a condominium looks like. And what you gotta realize is, if I got up and drew a picture of a block of land with a bunch of parking places and an apartment building with a bunch of units on it, that's gonna look just like an apartment building owned by one individual. It's gonna look just like a co-op apartment building, and it's gonna look just like a condominium. They all look alike. All we're talking about here is the legal structure of a multi-family apartment building. Not always a tall structure. Sometimes they're all on ground level. Sometimes they're high-rise, sometimes they're not. So to understand the concept of how a condominium is created, there's a good paragraph on the bottom of page 120, a couple of paragraphs. And what they say is, just to get the drift of what we're talking about here, that the developer of a condominium can physically put the building together in one of two ways. The developer can buy a vacant piece of land and build a building with a bunch of units. Or there's something we're going to talk about, called a conversion. And a conversion is where a developer buys a regular apartment building. He owns the whole apartment building. And he turns that existing structure into a condominium. In either event, you've got a developer, you've got a piece of land, you've got an apartment building. Whether he built it or whether he bought it, in either event, after it's built, the developer is going to file a document that we'll talk about in a minute that turns that structure and land into a condominium with individual units in it, which individual units can be sold to individual unit buyers who will own their apartments. And each of those apartment owner buyers will be buying not only his apartment, but a percentage undivided interest as a tenant in common in all the land and all of the building except for the units and except for everybody else's units. In other words, units are units, everything else is common elements, everything else. So, yes, sir.
You mentioned condo association earlier. Is it the requirement for the condo association to be members or
To be what?
To be owners of these individual units? Or
No, they don't
can be
own the-
outsiders?
Bear with me in a minute. We're going to discuss the condo association in a minute.
Okay.
I was assuming for the purpose of that discussion that everybody knew what a condo association was. It's hard to start somewhere and start talking about this area without some sort of baseline. the reason I mentioned that was to clarify, 9 out of 10 people will tell you that they think that the parking lot and the land and the rec facilities are owned by the condominium association. They're not. And we'll talk about the association in a minute, what it does do and what it is. But let me hold that off if I may, and I want to get into this in the order in which the text does so we can try to make this flow. In order to create a condominium, the developer, the guy who either built the building or acquired the building, files a document called a declaration of condominium. It's called the declaration. And when you understand what it's doing, you'll see why it's called a declaration. Simply put, the developer says, I hereby declare that this piece of property, which I own, which has 100 apartment units on it, is going to in the future be known as Happy Acres Condominium. And he records this document. And attached to that document are surveys, sketches of every single unit in the property. And every single unit is given a number, a unit number, a square footage. And sometimes these are filed before the units are built, and then they later have to file the surveys as attachments. If it's already an existing building, a conversion, then of course he has a survey. But the point is that every apartment in that building is going to get a unit number. And henceforth, the legal description of each of those apartments is the unit owner they're given in the declaration. So the developer says, you know, this is my piece of property, and this is how many units it has, and these are what the common elements are going to be, and in general talks about the project. Most importantly, files these surveys that show the exact dimensions of every single unit, so that in the future, when somebody buys a unit, they want to see what their unit is, they look back at the surveys at the back of the declaration, and there's an exact survey of the unit. And that's how a condominium is created. The materials say that there are 3 things necessary to create a condominium. Under Florida law, there's only 1. And it's the same as the first one the materials talked about, the declaration of condominium. You cannot have a condominium without filing a declaration of condominium in the public records of the county where the property is located. And what it does is it turns a piece of land and a building into a condominium that can be owned by individual units, owners owning individual apartments, and together owning everything else. Yes, ma'am?
You said together owning?
Together as tenants in common, owning everything else. And that tenant in common ownership interest is not necessarily equal for every apartment. If they were 10 identical condominium units in the building, and they were all exactly the same size, then probably every unit owner would own a 10% interest in the common elements.
Is it by square footage?
I'm sorry?
Is it by square footage? Their
Well,
percentage?
if they're identical, they're the same square footage, yes.
And they're
Okay.
not?
If they are not, normally by square footage is how they determine the percentage interest, but it's not required by law. What is required is that the declaration set forth the percentage interest in the common elements that is owned by every unit. And if, again, if it were 10 equal units, everybody has a 10% interest. But if there were, of those 10 units, 5 of them were 2 bedrooms and 5 of them were 1 bedrooms, then you would probably be apportioning that 100% interest over the 10 apartments differently. The 2-bedroom apartments would own more than a 10% interest, and the 1-bedroom apartments would own less than a 10% interest in order to make those things add up to 100. They always have to add up to 100. They're going normally to be allocated based upon square footage, but not necessarily. In some projects, they're based upon value of the units, and the value of the units is not always determined by the square footage. Sometimes a penthouse, based on its location at the top of the building and its privacy, may not be as big as other apartments, but it may have the highest percentage of the common elements because it was the highest price unit in the building. So sometimes they're allocated based on the initial price schedule of the developer, but they still have to add up to 100. Well, most often it is based on square footage. Okay, now, the declaration is going to contain that description of each unit by survey and by its percentage interest ownership. It's also going to contain restrictions. One level of restrictions. You're going to find out in the condominium, restrictions meaning rules and regulations and stuff like that get imposed at all kinds of levels. But some very, very basic restrictions get imposed in condominium declarations. Like, for example, restrictions on sale or leasing your unit. There will be provisions in every declaration of condominium that will say that an owner may not lease out his unit without the approval of somebody. And that somebody may be the board, that may be the association, that may be some special committee that the board has appointed to approve purchasers. But there is going to be a vehicle, a procedure, whereby anytime any unit owner wants to sell or lease his unit, the proposed occupant, whether it be a tenant or whether it be a buyer, has to be approved. And although that can sometimes be a little bit unfair in its application, that's how they all work, and the courts have upheld this. Upheld it based upon the right of the other unit owners to decide who they want to be their neighbor, who they think will pay his bills and will pay his share of the assessments, who will follow the rules. So if these aren't applied arbitrarily, these restrictions on leasing and selling will be upheld. The materials mentioned, and I just want you to be aware, it does apply in Florida also. The declaration of condominium, because it is long, it can be bigger than your textbook, and long pages and more surveys and more rules and exhibits and documents. Virtually every state requires that, virtually every state requires that a copy of that declaration be given to prospective purchasers with a time period for them to study the declaration, during which time period they can cancel their contract. In Florida, the document they're required to be given is not only the declaration, but it's much longer. It's called a prospectus. And it has all kinds of more stuff in there about assessment costs and warranties on improvements. And the legislature has said that any purchaser before a condominium contract can be enforced against the purchaser. The purchaser has to be given a copy of the condominium declaration and given 15 days to read it. And during that 15 days, the purchaser can cancel the contract if he doesn't like what's in the declaration. Yes, sir.
You mentioned the rules and regulations. I mean, for initial buyers.
Sorry?
For initial buyers, like a developer is
a new project.
A new project.
Yeah.
And he starts selling
units.
I mean, is there like a board, or is there someone who determines?
No. In that first sale, the developer will sell to everybody who has money. He couldn't care less. It's subsequent resales and leases will have to be approved by the board. The initial developer, he just wants money, he just wants to sell out his project. So there's nobody that has to approve those purchasers in the first sale by the developer.
But does the developer also hand the Florida, the legal issues to those buyers? I mean, that book you just mentioned, do the developer hand those information to?
The developer has to hand that information to a buyer.
Okay.
And until the buyer has been given that information and given 15 days to read it, the developer cannot enforce the sales contract.
Okay.
And the buyer can get a refund of his purchase price. So the Florida Department of Condominiums requires a developer in a new project to give to a purchaser this really big document called a prospectus, that is the declaration and a lot of other stuff. In a resale of a condominium, only the declaration is required to be given to a new purchaser. But in the initial purchase by the developer, there's a whole bunch more information. Because the department regulates developers a lot more heavily than it regulates resales.
Is it a statute?
By statute, the prospectus has to be given? Right. By statute, and the right to cancel. And there's a huge bold print paragraph that has to be in the sales contract that gives them, that tells them that they have the right to cancel.
And I'm sorry, you said that was a requirement of the Florida Department of Condominiums?
Well, that's who enforces it. Yeah,
That's
the
who
Florida
enforces it.
Division of Condominiums is who enforces all these rules, but it's in the Florida statutes as adopted by the legislature. Enforced by the division. Okay, now, the second important document that the book says is required in order to create a condominium, but which is not required in Florida, but you're going to see it anyway, it's not required, is the bylaws. Now, the bylaws are simply, just as in any corporation, the bylaws are the rules that govern the operation of the condominium development by the condominium association. We're going to talk about the association in a minute, but the bylaws are rules that will cover everything from top to bottom. How we're going to handle security, how we're going to pay taxes, how we're going to do maintenance, how people are going to pay assessments, how we're going to vote for directors, how we're going to appoint officers, how we're going to do every single thing, like even down to mowing the grass, is all set forth in the bylaws. And those are, in Florida, attached to the declaration when the declaration is recorded. These are the basic rules of how the condominium regime is going to operate. Who's going to make decisions, who's going to collect funds, who's going to pay bills, etc. Now, the bylaws are going to empower the condominium association, which we'll talk about in a minute, to make more rules and regulations. On a almost monthly basis, you will find that condominium associations are adopting new rules and regulations. You can't walk your dog here, your kid can't play in the mud puddle there, you can't have tricycles on this walkway. Ad nauseum into stupid little rules of how the property is going to operate. Those rules are determined by the board of directors of the condominium association, and they're put in what's called rules and regulations, and they are published regularly by the condominium association to the universe. Okay. Now, the common elements. We talked a little bit about the common elements, and I want to talk specifically about what common elements are. Common elements are, simply put, every portion of the condominium property that is not contained within a unit. And the common elements are owned in common by all of the unit owners, as we talked about, as tenants in common, in accordance with their percentage share that we talked about earlier, which is probably decided based on how big their apartment is. Now, so you can visualize this, what we're talking about is everything, when you leave a unit, you're inside an apartment unit. An apartment unit is owned by an individual. The moment you leave that unit, you're stepping into the common elements. You're stepping into the hallways. You're stepping into the stairs. You're stepping into the elevator. You're going into the lobby. You're going out into the parking lot. You go into the rec facility. You go into the tennis courts or the swimming pool. All the land, all the building or buildings are built on. There could be multiple buildings in this condominium. All of that land, all of those other improvements outside the unit are called common elements. And each unit owner owns a little bitty percentage of all of them. And what that means is, not just he owns 2% of the hallway outside his door. He owns 2% of the hallway on the other floor. He owns 2% of those parking spaces. If 2% is the number that applies to a unit, that unit owner owns 2% of everything wherever it's situated in the property. Okay? All right, most people don't understand that and think that means he gets the right to use his hall outside his door. He gets the right to use everybody's hall and everybody's elevator and every swimming pool and everything anywhere on the property. Those are called common elements. We talked about the percentage ownership is attributed in the declaration. There are two kinds of common elements that are owned by all the unit owners. There are general common elements and there are limited common elements. Now, general common elements are the basic common elements that we've talked about that everybody owns and everybody gets to use, which is elevators, halls, rec facilities, the land, etc. Limited common elements are owned still by all of the owners and their undivided interests, but their use is limited to certain unit owners. For example, a balcony. The balcony outside your condominium unit is not a part of your unit. It's a common element. It's owned 2% by everybody in the whole property, or 1% or whatever the percents are. But the balcony outside your unit, you own the same percentage in it as the guy down at the other end of the building. But it's a limited common element because only you, one unit owner, are allowed to use that balcony. The importance of it being a common element is, that means that it's maintained by the association. So your balcony is maintained by the association based on assessments that everybody pays because everybody owns your balcony. But you're the only one entitled to use your balcony or your parking space. Parking spaces are a classic example. Everybody owns all the parking spaces, but they get assigned. And once assigned, they become limited common elements. They are common elements, but their use is limited to a certain person or persons.
I had a question about limited common
Sure.
elements, just from my own personal experience. Is there ever a time when that can be taken away from an individual unit owner, that limited common element?
No.
Okay.
Not.
So it's
not
strictly for assessment purposes, not for, I mean, they could never
Like
band
for
together
big
as
users,
a.
use your balcony?
Yeah, no, the reason was because my balcony was connected to a much larger balcony that the entire community used. And so I was always concerned, I mean, it's everybody against me, and so if they ever wanted to take my balcony away to add it onto the community, room, I was like, what would be stopping, prevent them? Maybe not the whole thing, maybe they were gonna just take a portion of it, but I was always.
It would require an amendment to the declaration of condominium. Normally, an amendment to the declaration is gonna require the 75% of all the owners joining in it. But secondly, the statute on amendments says that any unit owner who is adversely affected by an amendment has to be in favor of the amendment, and you would vote in favor of it.
Right.
So what you gotta look at though, you got to look at the declaration and see if in fact it is a limited common element assigned to your unit.
Yeah, I
If
can
it
see
is,
that, yeah.
if you know that it is, then you're fine, that can't happen. These things are all pretty well set in cement once they're set up. It doesn't mean that the association can't decide, let's enlarge everybody's balconies, because they need rebuilding anyway, and then they would amend the declaration and attach new survey showing the new balconies and everything. I thought you were getting at, and where some people get into, people who aren't paying their assessments, the question is whether they can take facilities away from them. Whether they can tell them, you can't use your balcony because we're maintaining it and you're not paying your share. And that with a limited common element, they cannot.
Okay.
With a general common element, we now have court cases you can deny.
Really?
You can deny the use of the common elements to unit owners who are not paying their assessments after some certain, like
So
the
you
sky
can
is
deny
falling.
the use of an elevator to make them
Yeah,
upstairs.
what the intention is to keep them out of
You
swimming
put
pools
on
and
some
stuff like
weight,
that.
we're denying use of the elevator.
I have a question.
Yes, just want to make sure I didn't miss a point.
Because it's
Yes.
not that important. I'm sure it's true that the association can put a lien on your condo for not maintaining
Uh-huh.
fees, right?
Yeah, we're going to talk about that in a minute, as to how the association collects assessments and files liens and all that kind of. Did you have a specific question about it, or?
No, because then I thought about it, like, what am I gonna ask that?
Okay, yeah, we'll get to that, we'll come to that. Okay, but we needed to understand common elements and how they're owned, and most importantly, that they're maintained by the association. And not only in the example of in the balcony, in the sense of, is it good for you to have the association and everybody together maintaining your balcony? It is. But there's a safety factor there. The association needs to maintain the balcony in a safe condition, not only so you won't get hurt on your balcony, but so your balcony won't come down on the 7 balconies below it and pancake the entire place and kill everybody in all their balconies. So I mean, the association has an interest in maintaining the limited common elements. Even though you're the only one that's going to get to use it, they can create issues for other owners that would require the association's maintenance. Okay, now, the association. Let's talk about the association for a minute. The association is a Florida corporation. It is a Florida nonprofit corporation. Nonprofit corporations in Florida have members. They can have stockholders, but they usually don't. Virtually all of our nonprofit corporations and all of our condominium association nonprofit corporations have members. Members are unit owners. Members function like the stockholders in a regular corporation, but they're the members. And what that means is the members own the association. The association manages the property, as we know. Now, the members have meetings, just like stockholders do, and elect a board of directors. The board of directors of the association runs the association and therefore runs the property. Condominium board will appoint officers from amongst its members, 3 or 4 directors. One will be president, one will be secretary, one will be treasurer. They'll carry out those functions. They will hire employees. They'll hire security guards and maids and maintenance people to take care of the property. The members of the board have a fiduciary responsibility to the unit owners to manage it properly. What that means is they have a trust obligation to do it right, not to steal the association's money, which happens regularly. They are answerable to the unit owners, but they're also answerable to the Florida division that comes in and regulates them and audits them. Associations function like little governmental entities. Like a little bit like a little city commission. They sit there and they pass rules, they make decisions. Some of the things that they do are subject to constitutional prohibitions. The board of directors can't say, let's adopt a rule that we'll have no gay unit owners. Things that would be prohibited by a governmental body, if done by the governmental body, cannot be done by a condominium association, even though it's a private institution, because it has quasi-governmental effects. What it does, most particularly the association, is it manages the money. It collects assessments from all of the unit owners. There are regular monthly assessments, but they're not always monthly, sometimes they're quarterly. But there are regular assessments collected from unit owners for all of the regular recurring expenses. Electricity, lawn maintenance, paving the parking lot, repairing the roofs. That's a bad example. All of the regular recurring expenses. The association adopts a budget. What are all these things going to cost for this year? Takes that budget and applies the percentage that we talked about that each unit has in the common elements to that budget number and collects that amount of money from each unit owner. That make sense? These are the annual costs of the association. You have a percentage interest in the common elements. Those percentages add up to 100. Let's collect that percentage of the annual assessments from each unit owner. Maybe monthly, often quarterly. And the association has rules and in the bylaws provide how, and far in advance they have to adopt a budget, how they have to be fair in terms of how they figure these numbers, how they have to create reserves in the future for reserves for big things that are coming, like reserve for a roof. It may have to be done every 20 years. And they have to plug all these numbers in to get an annual budgeted amount that they can bill out to everybody as assessments for regular assessments. And then we'll have another one in that. Yes, ma'am. What's the question?
You said the officers were the treasurer and who else?
They can have whatever they want.
Oh, okay.
They will have a president, they will have a secretary, and they will have a treasurer, because those are required. But you'll find, they'll have 3 or 4 vice presidents, they'll have committee, there'll be a head of the dock committee, there'll be a head of the tennis court committee. I mean, they got badges and titles out the wazoo. Yes?
I mean, those owners, members, do they normally like sub the work out? I mean, give it to like a property manager or property management company to do that?
Yes and no. It depends on how big the property is. Many of them sub out the bookkeeping work and have the assessments collected by accounting firms that do this kind of work to figure out the dollar budgets and how much should come from each unit owner and collect the assessments. In addition, they of course hire guys to mow the lawn and to clean the pool. I mean, this is not something that unit owners do. The unit owners elect the board collects the money so that the board can hire people to make the repairs, to clean the pool, to mow the lawn, to do all these functions, to take care of the property. Does that make sense? Okay, all righty. Now, those were the regular assessments that we talked about, because these are the predictable annual costs of this much for the lawn, this much for the pool, this much for insurance, which is a biggie, because they insure the whole property in one swell swoop, so that the entire cost of insurance on all of the buildings for the whole year is lumped into these assessments and then assessed against the unit owners. Not real estate taxes, but insurance. From time to time, additional things are gonna come up that were not contemplated by the regular assessment. And those are called special assessments. So from time to time, the board will levy a special assessment for a special purpose. Like, whoops, all the trees died. We need to plant all new trees. They didn't plan on that in the budget. The cost is gonna be $20,000. Here's your percentage amount. This is a special assessment, a special one-time assessment to buy new trees. Your 2% of that total is and you have 6 months to pay it. And those bills go out to the owners and you have to pay it. Yes, sir.
What we're seeing now with special assessments is that these older condo buildings have to do their 40-year redo. And when I was selling a condo, and that was the big thing, is that there's an assessment about $25,000 to $30,000 because the whole building has to be redone, recertified.
On the 40-year inspection, inspection. I know those are coming.
Yeah, so a lot of these buildings are not hitting the 40 years now, so that special assessment's, it's quite a lot of money when it comes into it.
And they usually spread.
Yeah.
Those big ones get spread over
a few years.
3, 4, 5 years, whatever it takes. The unit owners decide. I mean, you know, if the board says to everybody, there's a $20,000 assessment per unit and it's due tomorrow. Well, you know, the unit owners are gonna come in and fire the board. I mean, the board members are unit owners too,
Yeah.
you know. So hopefully they're doing the right thing to make it happen. Sometimes they have to go out and borrow the money from a bank to get the work done. And then collect the assessments and pay the loan back to the bank to get this work. Sometimes the work has to be done right now and they don't have the money. So condo associations will borrow money from banks, pledging their lien rights that we're going to talk about in a minute in order to collect the money to repay the loan.
Do you see them typically setting up reserve accounts just for things like that? Like, hey, we know.
Well, reserve accounts are required now by the statute, right?
Okay.
And what they're required to do now is, for example, say, we'll need a roof every 20 years. That means we need to collect 1/20th of a roof repair job in each year's annual cost. And 1/15th of a paint job. And 1/10th of a pavement resurfacing job. And they're required to collect those every year. The problem is, when they set that amount for the roof job, well, 20 years later when they do the roof job, it costs 8 or 10 times the amount they've been collecting for the last 20 years. And that's inflation, and that's the problem. They're supposed to every year come in and re-revise those things, but nobody does it. But if they didn't collect those things, early on in condominiums, they didn't even have reserve funds for anything. So all of a sudden, whoops, it's 20 years later, we need a new roof, and we need the new roof today, you know. And there was no reserve money whatsoever. Now, at least they're able to build into the engineers, can predict the useful life of an improvement of a roof, of a paint job, and say it's 15 years and we're 3 years into it, so we've got 12 more years to go to spread the remaining cost over 12 years. And they're supposed to re-revise that cost, though. As you get closer and closer to that, they're supposed to get new numbers and increase to try to make up the difference. They never do. You're always behind the 8 ball in an inflationary economy, where those numbers keep getting bigger. You know, it's always a carrot on the stick is out. They're going to be ahead of you. You'll never keep up with it. And therefore, there will always be special assessments for these, even for these recurring type activities, because they haven't reserved enough. In addition, the 40-year inspection, as Alex was talking about, our now county have mandated that every building over 40 years old have an inspection, and whatever deficiencies are found, they have to be fixed. And they're imposing these on condominiums and telling them, we don't care if you people are happy and you like where you live and you don't want to spend the money. We're telling you you need to spend the money. Sometimes they're safety things. I mean, like when they brought in the fire sprinkler thing. Condominium said, we don't care, we're not worried, we're not going to have a fire. The state said, we don't care what you think. You are gonna put in a fire sprinkler system and you're gonna pay for it even if you don't want one. Because the state gets to regulate on things that are public safety.
The new thing is the impact windows and doors. A lot of those condominiums, especially the high ones that are very tall, they have to put in, those are very expensive. So it's like, when I was selling this property, it's condo in Brickell Key, a lot of the people did not want to pay the assessment because it was known about it, so they were trying to get the owner of the condo to pay the assessment before he sold the house. Sorry, before he sold the condo, because it was so much money. And not even that, the amount of work that goes into it, the whole building's under construction, it's just, it's the thing about condos, people think about, your monthly maintenance fee, but that's not it. It just keeps growing and growing,
Condo financing is scary too, in the sense that people, you blend into this, the shortfall of the amounts that they're collecting anyway, added to the underwater mortgage crisis that we had for the last 7 or 8 years, where people are defaulting on their mortgages. Each one of those people who's not making their mortgage payment isn't paying the association either. But the bill's not any less. It still costs the same amount to clean the swimming pool, whether only 10 people are putting in or all 50 are putting in. And so everybody who is putting in is having to make up for the share of those who are not. We'll get into collection procedures in a minute and everything and leaning the unit, but it's not an effective remedy because it doesn't generate the money. The money still has to be there to pay the guy, to pay FPL, to pay the painter, to pay the roofer. So it's tough. Running a condominium is a tough business. And there are always going to be unhappy people. And of course, everybody's unhappy when any of their bills go up. It's just that they all get together in one room at the condominium and scream at the board of directors, and usually not the board's fault.
Isn't their motto, we're not happy until you're not happy?
I've not heard that one, but I like it. I like it. Marielle touched on, which we didn't talk about yet, the collection of assessments and lien rights. If an owner of a condominium unit does not pay his assessments, the association gets to file a lien against his unit. And if he still doesn't pay, the association can foreclose that lien just like it forecloses any mortgage and can actually take his unit away. There will be a foreclosure sale at the courthouse selling a condominium unit pursuant to the association's lien, and the unit will be sold. Now usually it's the condominium association that ends up owning the unit. At least they can lease it out then. They can put a tenant in there and get some money out or sell it. But most often, if the guy wasn't paying the association, he wasn't paying a mortgage too.
Question on
And the
that.
mortgage is going to get foreclosed, and that's who's going to get the unit.
Yeah, so the mortgage holds the higher responsibility over the condo association.
Absolutely,
Okay.
always,
So,
always.
I was looking at, we were looking at a few foreclosures, and not only did the mortgage, the as well, but the condo association also has a lien on the property.
Yep, but it's always junior to the mortgage. And both are junior to real estate taxes. Our first priority we're going to talk about is real estate taxes. If they don't get paid, even the lender gets wiped out. And then the first mortgage lender, the condo association comes at the back end. So if the condo association forecloses and takes back the unit, well, there may still be a mortgage on there that's underwater being foreclosed. There may be real estate taxes that haven't been paid, and the condo association has to catch up on all these things before you can sell the unit. At least maybe you can lease it, and if it leases it out, at least it gets some income to help generate funds to pay that unit's share of the expenses going forward. Doesn't help at all with the arrearages. But that's how these assessments get collected, is because the association has a lien and can sue, foreclose, and take away the unit to pay back the amounts that weren't paid to the association that were having to kick in by other unit owners. So it's a snowball and it's a mess. Yes, I'm sorry.
So if it forecloses, it goes to auction, and if no one buys it at auction, then the association takes it?
Right.
And they take it for free, you don't have to pay a dime, right?
I'm sorry?
Do they take, is it free? I mean, they just automatically get it?
Yes,
Or
if
you
no,
have to
if
pay?
nobody else bids at the auction. And nobody else is gonna bid at the auction, if there's a first mortgage on there that's in default. If taxes aren't paid and there's a first mortgage, nobody's gonna bid, so the association gets the unit. Yeah, and the unit owner has lost all of his equity, he loses his unit. But, that's the chance you take.
But the association does not pay anything for it?
No,
Okay,
no.
that's what I'm.
What they're deemed to have paid is all of the assessment money that they had to eat that this
Right.
unit owner didn't pay. But when they come back in, if the guy had a $100,000 mortgage on there, they still have to make the mortgage payments on that mortgage, it doesn't go away.
Mhm.
And it's probably in foreclosure too.
So
And
the
it's about to
association-
wipe them out, wipe the
What if,
association out.
what if the owner pays the mortgage, like, you know, it doesn't go on foreclosure for the mortgage part? Can they go back and do something against the association to get the unit back, or no, it's gone?
Can who get it back, I'm sorry?
If
The owner?
the original owner,
Yeah,
they have a foreclosure for the condominium, but not for the mortgage? Or did they pay off the mortgage and can they come back after the association took the unit? No.
I'm not sure I'm following the dominoes. of
Because
what
the
you're saying.
so the association gets it back,
The association
owner
takes the
loses.
unit, but the mortgage is still on there.
right, and the owner is lost the unit already.
Yeah, he's not coming
He
back.
cannot come back,
No,
okay.
under any circumstance.
Okay,
No, absolutely.
Even if he
His
pays something
ownership
else.
interest has been wiped out.
okay.
But his ownership interest can be wiped out by not paying the taxes, or by not paying his mortgage, or by not paying the association. Any one of them can wipe him out.
Taxes association.
And there is no coming back. I mean, once anyone has foreclosed, taxes don't really foreclose, but it's like that. We'll talk about that. But once either the condo association or the mortgage lender has foreclosed and has taken title away from that owner, no, he doesn't get to come back and say, I was just kidding. Here's my money now.
Okay.
Absolutely not.
So the association pays the mortgage if there's a.
If they don't pay the mortgage, they lose the unit.
The association.
Exactly.
Okay.
If the association doesn't pay the mortgage, the bank will foreclose and the bank will take the unit. And then the association won't have it anymore either.
Okay.
But at least, once the bank takes title, then it has to start paying assessments. Somebody, hopefully, will have to start paying the assessments again.
Okay.
No, the association cannot be required to pay the mortgage, but if it doesn't, it loses the unit.
Okay.
So it has to make a decision, you know, how big is the mortgage, is it worth keeping? If the unit's worth $100,000, but it's a $200,000 mortgage, you don't make the payments, you know. But if it's a $100,000 unit and it's only a $20,000 mortgage, yeah, you make the payments because you got $80,000 worth of equity there, you know. So they make a business decision on whether to make the mortgage payments or just to let the unit go. Okay. Does anybody have any questions on a condo? Because now we're going to switch over to a co-op and compare the two. Anybody have any questions on how the condo works and operates and what these terms mean? And, I want to say this again for about the fourth time, though, just because I know that the misconception is there. The unit owners own the common elements, not the association. And the unit owners, in their real estate taxes, are paying taxes not only on their unit, but on their undivided interest in the common elements. What that does is that gets the taxes paid on the land. Once you create a condominium, the land itself is not taxed anymore. The units are taxed. And the units each carry with them a percentage ownership of the land. So that's how the land taxes are getting paid, when the unit owners pay the taxes on a unit. And that land, of course, includes all the rec facilities and pools and tennis courts, and all that stuff is being taxed as a part of the real estate tax on each unit. But there is no separate tax bill on the tennis courts anymore. There's just everybody's own tax bill on the unit. Okay, now we're going to talk about a co-op, a cooperative partner, and compare it a bit with the condominium to understand the differences. A co-op, as we said at the outset, is an apartment building on a piece of land with parking spaces and halls and elevators and individual units. And for all intents and purposes, it looks just like a condominium or it looks just like an apartment building. But its ownership structure is different. The unit owner, and I'm using the term loosely, the person who gets and occupies a unit in a co-op does not own his unit. In a condominium, the unit owner owns his unit. In a co-op, he does not. In a co-op, which is a cooperative apartment, a corporation owns the whole building. The entire building and land and everything is all owned by a corporation, just like a condominium was before he sold off the units, right? Like we said, a developer owns a building or build a building. Well, here, a corporation owns a building. In order to put different people in different units in a co-op, the co-op corporation, it's a corporation, sells its stock to the people who are going to occupy the units. So again, I'm going to keep using this term loosely, the unit owners each owns stock in the cooperative corporation that owns the building. And each stockholder gets a proprietary lease. That's a term of art. A proprietary lease to an individual apartment. Now, a proprietary lease means a lease where you're really an owner. You're a proprietor. You're not paying rent under that lease for your unit. And you are kind of a proprietor. You're a stockholder in the corporation that gave you the lease. The corporation that owned the building gives you a proprietary lease to your unit. Well, you're a stockholder in that corporation anyway. Yes?
What about, does that mean that you can change units?
You can what?
Does it mean that you can change being the owner or occupier of one unit, like unit 6, and then you want to switch to unit 10, let's say?
Well, you'd have to work that out with the guy in unit 10, you know?
Right.
Okay.
What
Yeah,
I'm
what I
saying
mean
is-
is like, is it just one, or can you like, can you switch it? Is what.
Is it like a hippie commune where you
Well-
can use anybody's room at any time?
No, a proprietary lease means it's
Yes.
yours and you're gonna live there full time, basically.
Okay,
You don't
okay.
have to live there, but the concept is, it's your
Your
unit,
rights to it.
you're entitled to occupancy full time. Now, you might lease it out to somebody else,
Okay.
but your ownership of stock in the corporation entitles you to a proprietary lease of an apartment. Now, under that lease, I'm sorry, yeah.
Isn't it safe to say that you can explain it like this, you don't own a unit, you are owning a stock.
Exactly. You own stock,
The stock-
but you have, in the corporation that owns the whole building,
Right.
but you have a proprietary lease that gives you the right to occupy your unit.
What would be the
And
benefit?
each stockholder does, each stockholder. Every person in a unit owns stock, and every stockholder has a proprietary lease to one unit, or 2 or 3, or however many you buy, you know? Yes?
So what are the benefits of a co-op over a condo?
Well, we're gonna compare some of that stuff in a minute, but you need to understand the structure of it, that you are not a unit owner, you don't own real estate, you own stock, and you lease some real estate. Under your lease, you're not paying rent. Under your lease, you pay your share of the expenses. Your rent under your lease is like the assessments were in the condominium. Because the building has costs, elevators, staff, parking lots, roof, lawn, all the same stuff goes on in the co-op. And the rent that you pay under your lease is not rent like for the right to stay there. It's rent representing your share of the expenses for taking care of the building. The big, most significant difference is financing. It's almost impossible to get a mortgage on a co-op as opposed to mortgage on your condominium unit. In a co-op, here's what happens. There usually is one big fat mortgage on the whole building. If the whole building is, let's say it's a 10-unit building and it's worth $1 million. So therefore, everybody's apartment is loosely worth $100,000. There may be an $800,000 mortgage on that whole building. That's not the same as an $80,000 mortgage on each unit. Totally different animal. There is an $800,000 mortgage on that entire building. If it doesn't get paid, you all go down the tubes together. Everybody loses everything. In a condominium, you have your own mortgage on your unit. That's all you have to worry about. In a condominium is you making your own payments on your own mortgage and you'll get to keep your unit. In a co-op, you got to worry that everybody's making the payment share, because unless you want to step up and make somebody else's payments for it, the whole building's going to get flushed and you're all going to go down together. The unit, the mortgage in a co-op is not allocated on a unit basis. It's a mortgage on the whole building. And it's extremely difficult, it's possible, to get an individual mortgage on your co-op unit from a bank. But it's hard. Because what you're pledging is a lease, and you're pledging your stock. You see, you're not pledging the ownership of an apartment like you are in a condo. You're not mortgaging real estate. All you have to give them as collateral is a stock certificate and a proprietary lease. Yes, ma'am?
Where are cooperatives most common? Where are co-ops found or most common? Are they predominant in Florida?
I couldn't hear you, I'm sorry.
Where are those structures mostly predominant? Where are co-ops? I haven't
Oh,
seen
a co-op can be right next door to a condominium. They're all over the beaches in Fort Lauderdale, they're all over the old, people did co-ops long, in South Florida, people did co-ops long before they ever did condominiums. Older buildings all along the intercoastal. You see all these little tiny apartment buildings down the intercoastal, little tiny wall units in them? They're all co-ops. They were all built in the 40s and 50s. Virtually everything in New York City is a co-op. They're big on co-ops in New York. They like them. And there are very few co-ops built today. But once a building is built and created as a co-op, it is technically legally possible to turn it into a condominium, but it's tough. It's real tough. It can be done, but it's tough.
Could they be treated as apartments?
I'm sorry?
Could they be treated as apartments? Like, can you just lease them out?
I'm not sure I know what you mean by that. I mean, you mean by apartments like one landlord renting out a bunch of apartments?
Mm-hmm.
Well, could
Could a
what be treated like?
Could a co-op be treated as like a multi-family unit or a building?
Well, I don't know what I mean by treated though. What I'm getting at.
And they put a property manager in place and just rent out every unit? And
Well, they could if they didn't want to live in the units. Most people buy them because they want to live in the units. Just like a condo. Most people buy these things, condos or co-ops, either one, because they want to occupy the units. Now, sometimes they're investors, they want to lease it back out. Sure, everybody in the co-op could all decide, let's all move out and let's hire a manager and let him rent the whole place out. Well, you can do that. But the reason they bought a co-op apartment on the beach because they want to live there, you know? And, I mean, yeah, you could. You could do the same thing in a condominium. Everybody could get together and say, let's all move out, and hire some manager to lease this place out if they wanted to. Sure, they could, but I've never heard of it being done because it doesn't make any sense. It just, no reason to do that. Ryan, I want to try to answer your question. The materials try to compare the differences and the advantages and the disadvantages, and it does a horrible job of it. Real confusing. Co-ops are very hard to sell because you're not selling real estate. You're selling stock and a lease. They're obviously very hard to finance because you can't get a mortgage on your own unit. So most co-op deals are done in cash. Most of these old mortgages on these co-op buildings have all been paid off because they were 30, 40-year mortgages, and these projects were so old that the mortgages are gone, and therefore you really are paying in full in cash to buy your stock in that building, because you know the stock value is not reduced by the amount of a mortgage, it's the whole value of the building now. The materials say that there's some tax advantage, but I've never heard of it. Co-ops in Florida are taxed for real estate purposes, just like condominiums. You get a tax bill on your unit. You can get homestead exemption in Florida on your co-op unit. Given your druthers, I mean, if you were looking at two identical buildings for an identical price, and one was a condo, one was a co-op, as a buyer, you'd rather buy the condominium because you own a piece of land. Sure, yeah, you own it. You have to own it. And the other building, you really don't own it at all. And a co-op, you're so dependent on everybody else. We talked about earlier, in a condo, you're kind of dependent on everybody else because if everybody else isn't paying their assessments, you got a hell of a mess. But at least you still own your unit. In a co-op, if people aren't paying their assessments, that mortgage isn't getting paid and the whole thing goes down. You all go down together. Yes, sir.
I had a question, like say you had a situation where a developer built, you know, a co-op, but was only able to lease up half, fill half, sell half of it.
Yeah.
Instead of like a condo, that the developer would bear that brunt. In a co-op, if you're only a half full building, the co-op suffers, correct? I mean, they're banking on filling all their units, because if every unit that's empty is a larger share that the co-op has to pay into, would that not be the case?
Yes, the developer though, let me tell you.
In that case, the developer goes bankrupt, and the co-op is the only one left.
Let me tell you how these things usually happen. Usually in a co-op, until the developer has pre-sold every unit,
right,
he doesn't actually pull the trigger and create the co-op. In other words, if there are 20 units, he has all 20 closings all lined up and does them all at one time, and it all happens. But he doesn't do the first 10, and then he gets stuck with the second half, so to speak, that he can't sell. In a condominium, they do go ahead though and start selling units, because in a condominium, once you file that, you can't sell the first unit in a condominium until you've recorded that declaration, and once you've recorded that declaration, there is no looking back.
I guess my point was that for every unit that's vacant in a co-op, that's painful for the rest of the units that are.
It is.
So,
but
unlike a condo, which if there's a vacant unit in a condo, that may not necessarily affect my rent every month.
Well, as long as somebody's paying the assessments on that,
right.
As long as somebody is,
right.
You know, then you're not affected. I guess what I'm trying to say to you is, once a co-op is fully sold out by the developer, there really aren't any vacant units. You know what I mean? 10 different people on them, and each one is selling and trading and buying or whatever, once they're all sold at initial time. I know what you're saying is, what about the first time when the developer's trying to sell it? And what I'm saying to you is, in a co-op situation, if there are 20 units, he doesn't sit down and close 10 of them and hope he sells the other 10. He sits down and sells all 20 at one time.
What if someone in the co-op ends up foreclosing for whatever reason? And you said they pay cash only, so but
if somebody forecloses and somebody else owns it. In other words, there's never.
What do you mean somebody else owns it though? I don't understand that. I mean, if I'm
whenever a unit gets foreclosed,
right,
somebody is foreclosing and is taking it back.
Oh, the bank.
Yeah, the bank foreclosing a mortgage, they'd be taking it back.
Right.
That's your own.
Okay.
There's always gonna be an owner, so to speak, is what I'm saying. Even in a condominium, there's always an owner, whether it's a lender who foreclosed or whether it's a purchaser's estate because somebody died and it moved on or whatever.
What if okay.
I understand what you're saying about what happens in projects where all the units don't get sold,
Right.
and that does happen.
Right.
And who ends up owning it is the bank who was financing the whole thing. They
Right.
foreclose and take back the remaining units, and then they sell them off
Right.
at a gross discount, but I mean, they get them sold. So
Does the co-op ever, the unit members of that co-op ever have to share in that burden of not having all the units sold? Because it's a stock, and because it's a mass share instead of the condos where you actually can say, no, I'm not legally responsible for paying.
I honestly don't know how to answer your
That would
question.
be a huge disadvantage in my mind.
I need to say to you that co-ops are so rare, it's
Right.
like talking about dinosaurs.
Okay.
You know, I mean, there are a few of them around, they get, when they can, when the owners can all, the problem in any of these things is getting everybody to agree that today is Saturday. But you can sit all of these co-op owners down with a good condominium lawyer, and you can explain to all of them, if we converted this co-op, and all of you agreed, and we convert this to a condominium, you'll end up owning your unit, you can then sell your unit, you can mortgage your unit, this would be a wonderful idea. And there will always be one idiot who will say no. And in a co-op, it's gonna require every single one of them. It's gonna require every single stockholder of the corporation to agree to do it, to convert to condominium. But one by one, they're being converted, and that, in a sense, that answers Ryan's question about which one is better. Condominiums are clearly better because co-ops are converting to condos, but they ain't converting the other way.
Well, the other thing you just mentioned was just that you can mortgage. If you were trying to take out a second mortgage, you can't take out a second mortgage on a co-op, right? Like-
It's very hard to take out a first mortgage on a
Right.
unit.
Well, but say you've paid off, like you said, the co-ops are paid off, and you had a paid off condo. I mean, you could take out a mortgage on a condo.
On your own unit, yes.
Right.
Yeah.
That's not the case in the
It's
co-op,
still
right?
very difficult, even if it's all
Because they're
paid
gonna be
off,
like-
because your collateral is
That's
under
right.
stock and a lease,
Right.
even if the building itself
That's
is
another
built.
huge
But what
disadvantage.
often will happen is everybody will say, let's go in and refinance the whole building, and let's get a new $500,000 mortgage.
Right.
And we'll each pull 50 grand out. That's nice, as long as everybody keeps making their payments to pay it
Right,
back.
exactly, yeah.
Co-ops just don't wanna.
And there are a lot of good reasons not to be a co-op.
I
But
think-
once you started down that road, it's not an easy thing to fix because it takes every single Indian agreeing to fix it. And you gotta spend some money to do it. You know, to file documents, hire a lawyer, and create a condominium out of a co-op. It's doable, like any other conversion. It's doable. It's
So-
just painful.
So back when loans, in my mind, the only time you would do a co-op is if, back when loans were difficult for developers to get, to actually build something, then maybe a co-op where everybody kind of pitches in and pays cash to build a new unit, you could build something new. But
But
nowadays,
I've never
is
seen
so
a bunch of
free.
people, it sounds like in theory,
Right.
like a bunch of us all got together and decided to build this nice new building in the ocean. It doesn't happen that way.
Right.
You don't have 75 people all of a sudden show up and
Well, maybe
say,
in the late
let's each put in
70s.
$100 grand and build a beautiful oceanfront building. you
Well,
know?
maybe in the late '70s you could see that, but not nowadays. I mean, there's no way you could.
I don't,
Just
I,
to get everyone to.
I'll bet you couldn't get 6 people in this room to all get
To
together.
get
and
everyone
talk.
to
You
agree
know what?
on
I
to
mean,
build the building, think about that. 'Cause then you have 75 different people.
My
I'm saying
question
the
is,
only reason that it would happen.
Isn't it
is if you
cheaper
couldn't
though?
leverage funds, right?
for-
If
to-
lending
to
stopped,
get a stock than to
because
pay for
interest
a
rates are
whole
so high,
mortgage in a unit?
Yeah.
lending literally stopped.
It's like you said it's
And
mostly
you
the
wanted a new
cash,
building,
so I'm thinking it's cheaper.
you
In
could.
theory.
Is it cheaper or not?
Cheaper to do what?
Create a
To
co-op.
get a stock for a co-op than to buy,
But the
than
point
to
is,
get a mortgage.
you guys
rate.
build a condo.
Like the value
Right,
of
like
it,
that.
is the
You know,
value
a
the
condo
same
requires
or?
The value of a building
for
Yes.
development.
is.
Yeah.
There's no such thing.
Building
as-
and the
That's right.
sticks
There's
and
no such
bricks
thing as
and the
100
view
people coming
and the
together to
location.
build a condo.
And whether it's an apartment building or whether